The Empire has more guns than we have bodies. So what do? Robin asked. We convince Parliament to vote against the war. Pamphlets, lobbying, public pressure. We make the cost of invasion too high to bear. It's slower than what Griffin wanted, but it has a chance. Fanned. And if it doesn't work? Anthony was silent. Then we try something else. They emerged into a vast underground chamber, the old library, a forgotten repository of books and manuscripts too dangerous or obscure for Babel's official collections. Shelves stretched into darkness. Scholars worked at scattered desks. A kettle of iron and silver sat on a stove, humming with a security enchantment. This is what we've been protecting, Anthony said. Not just silver, knowledge, languages the Empire is trying to erase. Robin walked through the library in a daze, books in languages he could not identify, maps marked with pins tracking dying tongues, a workshop where silver bars were engraved with word pairs that had no part in the Imperial project. He sat at a long table where other Hermes members were gathering: Kathy Onal, Vimal Srinivasan, Ilse Dejima. Someone put a bowl of stew in front of him. He ate without tasting it. And then he started to cry, a release of pressure he had not known he was carrying. He cried for Ramy, for Victoire, for Letty, sitting at the far end of the table with a face like shattered glass. He cried for his mother, for Canton, for the boy who had called him Papa. He cried because he had killed his father and felt nothing, and then had found a library full of people fighting for something he believed in, and he felt everything at once. Kefi put a hand on his back. It's all right. You're home now, the brother returns. The door to the old library slammed open. Griffin, his half-brother, strode in, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a fresh bruise on his jaw. The House of Lords, he said. They're debating a military expedition to China. The vote is in 3 days. The room went still. 3 days, Anthony repeated. The session wasn't supposed to start until Palmerston fast-tracked it. He has the votes? Griffin's gaze swept the room, landing on Robin. You've been busy, little brother. Robin could not meet his eyes. He was still seeing the boy in the corridor. We're working on a strategy, Anthony said. Pamphlets, lobbying pamphlets. Griffin's voice dripped contempt. The Empire does not read pamphlets. The Empire reads ledgers, casualty reports, and the language of force. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat and spread them across the table. Diagrams, maps, Operation Divine Fury. We take the tower, seize Babel, disable the silver bars, hold the Institute hostage until the government cancels the invasion. This is suicide, Anthony said. It's leverage. Babel is the throat the Empire breathes through. Cut off the silver, and England chokes. The government will negotiate. The government will send soldiers. Then we fight. The argument was brutal. Anthony and Kathy argued for persuasion. Griffin argued for force. The room splintered. Robin sat at the edge of the table and said nothing. When the meeting broke up, Griffin found him outside. The night air was cold. You've been avoiding me, Griffin said. You killed Evie Brooke. Griffin's expression did not change. Fighter? Yes. Why? Because she was a trap. She pretended to join Hermes. She fed information to Lovell and Playfair. When I found out, she smiled at me and told me I was too late. So, I stopped her. When someone threatens everything you're building, you remove the threat. She was 19 years old. She was a weapon. The Empire has more weapons than we do. That's the arithmetic. Robin wanted to argue that there had to be another way, a cleaner way. But he had killed Lovell. He had felt the silver bar sing in his hand and watched the life go out of his father's eyes. He was in no position to lecture anyone about clean hands. Griffin drew a revolver from his belt. He led Robin to a clearing, lit a lantern, set up bottles on a fallen log, and showed him how to load, cock, and fire. The recoil slammed through Robin's wrist. The bottle shattered. A strange, hot sensation spread through his chest. Power. He had reached across the clearing and stopped something that had been whole a moment before. The feeling was terrifying. The feeling was addictive. He understood Griffin better than he wanted to. The news breaks. At dawn, Kathy brought the newspapers. The front page of the Times carried woodcut portraits, 3 of them. Robin Swift, wanted for inquiry into the death of Professor Richard Lovell. Ramy's portrait beside his. Victoire's beside Ramy's. Letty's face was not there. No one spoke. The omission was louder than any accusation. Letty looked at the papers, and her expression did something complicated: guilt, relief, fear before settling into a mask of concern. "Why am I not there?" she whispered. "You're English," Victoire said, "the Admiral's daughter. You don't fit the story they want to tell." Anthony took the papers away. "You can't leave the library. If you're seen in Oxford, you'll be arrested." Griffin left before dawn for Glasgow, where he planned to sabotage the iron-hulled steamships being built for the China expedition. The remaining Hermes members drafted pamphlets and sent runners to London. Robin tried to help, but his mind kept circling back to the newspaper, to Letty's absence from it. That evening, Anthony gathered them in a small study. "We've been going about this wrong. We've been appealing to morality. The British public does not care about justice, they care about interests. The abolition of the slave trade in 1807 wasn't a moral victory. The West Indian planters were becoming unprofitable. The slave revolts were costing too much. France was threatening competition. Date. Abolition served British interests, so it passed." Robin stared at him. "So we make the war expensive." "Precisely. We don't tell the public invading China is wrong. We tell them it will destroy the economy. We build a coalition workers angry about silver-driven unemployment, merchants fearing trade disruption, abolitionists who see the opium trade as a moral stain." He pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. "This contains contact information for a dozen Hermes associates, safe houses, dead drops, names you can trust. If something happens to me, this network keeps running. Griffin would never share it with you. He doesn't trust anyone. But you four have proven yourselves." Robin, Ramy, and Victoire leaned in to examine the envelope. Letty stood up. "I need some air," she said. No one stopped her. Robin watched her go, a prickle of unease at the back of his neck. She had been quiet all day. He told himself it was the shock of the newspapers, the stress of the impending vote. He was wrong. Letty's betrayal and Ramy's death. Sabyalti, the shot. Letty returned 20 minutes later. She was not alone. The door crashed open, and men poured through, policemen in heavy coats, constables with truncheons. Behind them, silhouetted in the doorway, Letty, now revealed as the betrayer, held a revolver in both hands. She kept hearing Ramy's voice from that morning, the line she could not shake: "Your country sells silver bars to slave traders." It had coiled inside her all day, tightening with every hour, until she could not breathe around it. "Don't move," she said. Her voice was high and thin. "Don't any of you move." Robin could not process what he was seeing. Letty was pointing a gun at them. Letty, who had held his hand on the ship. Letty, who had once told him she understood what it was like to be powerless. "Letty," Victoire said, "what are you doing?" "What I have to." Her hand shook, but the gun stayed level. "You've been planning a war against your own country, and you expected me to just go along with it. As if I had no loyalty, as if I had no conscience." "Your country is about to invade China," Ramy said, voice cold. "Your country has been selling opium to addict millions. Your country's institute sells silver bars to slave traders. Where exactly is your conscience, Letty?" "Shut up," she was crying, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I didn't want this, but you left me no choice." Robin's eyes went to the envelope on the table, the envelope full of Hermes contacts. Victoire saw it too. She lunged for the fireplace. Letty fired. The sound was enormous, a crack that shattered the air. Victoire staggered but kept moving, and then Robin saw that it was not Victoire who had been hit. Ramy was on the floor. He had been standing between Victoire and the door. He had stepped into the line of fire without thinking, the way he had once stepped between Victoire and a thrown egg in the street outside Babel. The bullet had taken him in the chest. The room dissolved into chaos. Policemen surged forward. Victoire was screaming. Letty was backing away, the revolver smoking in her hand. "I didn't mean I was aiming for the papers. I didn't mean to." Robin launched himself at her, hands reaching for her throat, a roar tearing out of him that did not sound human. He wanted to feel her neck snap under his fingers. He had never wanted anything so purely in his entire life. 3 policemen wrestled him to the ground. His face hit the stone floor, and for one moment the world went still, the smell of gunpowder hanging thick in the air. Ramy's hand lying palm up 3 feet away, the fingers already slack, the blood spreading dark across the floorboards toward Robin's cheek. He could not reach him. He could not move him. He could only watch the blood, slow as the hand stopped being a hand and became a shape on the floor. Someone pulled a black bag over his head. He fought until the bag was cinched tight and his arms pinned behind his back, and then he stopped fighting because there was no point. Ramy was dead. Letty had killed him. His best friend was dead. Sterling Jones tortures Robin in Oxford Castle. 小标题, The Waking Nightmare. They took him to the Oxford Castle prison. The cell was small, damp, rough-hewn stone. Someone had carved words into the walls, Latin mostly. Miserere mei, have mercy on me. But others had been cleverer, the stones whispered. Robin discovered this when the silence became unbearable, and he pressed his ear to the wall. Words faint at first, then louder confessions, epitaphs, the last words of men who had died in this cell. Someone at Babel had engraved a bar with the word epitaphium, giving voice to the dead. Every death, every grief, every final plea was preserved in the rock. He listened until he could not bear to listen anymore. He did not know how long he waited. Hours, a day. He did not eat. He did not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ramy falling. Every time he opened them, he heard Letty's gun go off. The door opened. Sterling Jones walked in, immaculate dark coat, white cravat, polished boots. Mr. Swift, we meet again. His smile was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment a long time. He produced a thin silver bar engraved with a word Robin did not recognize. Sooth, Old English, it means sickness. When I activate it, you will feel as if every nerve in your body is on fire. He activated it. The pain was beyond anything Robin had ever experienced, white-hot agony turning his muscles to water and his thoughts to static. He screamed. Sterling watched with mild academic interest. I can make it stop. Just tell me about Hermes. The pain stopped. Robin collapsed, gasping. I don't know anything. You know everything. Sterling produced a second bar, engraved with a Greek word, friend, mind. This one is more subtle. It simply untethers you. Your thoughts will scatter. Your tongue will loosen. He pressed the bar to Robin's chest. The effect was immediate. Robin felt his mind dissolve, barriers between thought and speech crumbling. Words poured out of him, Chinese, English, fragments of Latin and Sanskrit. His mother, the opium den in Canton, the silver bar that had killed his father. He tried to clamp his mouth shut, but the bar was stronger than his will. Tell me about Hermes, Sterling said. Robin heard himself speak. Names, places, the old library, the tunnels, the dead drops. He could not stop. Good, Sterling said. He raised his voice. Bring in the girl. 2 constables dragged Victoire into the cell. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, but her eyes were clear and furious. Sterling produced a pocket watch. 30 seconds, Mr. Swift. Tell me everything, the full network, every contact, or I will shoot Miss Disgraves in the head. 30. 29. 28. Robin tried to speak. The bar was still on his chest, still scrambling his thoughts, and the words came out broken, useless. 17. 16. 15. Victoire looked at Robin. There was no fear in her face, only a terrible, steady calm. It's all right, Robin, 8. 7. 6. Robin screamed something, a name, a plea, and Sterling reached 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the gun went off. The constables let go of Victoire, and she dropped. And the sound she made was not a scream, but a sigh. Sterling put the watch away. Pity. Robin looked at Victoire's body. He looked at Sterling's calm, satisfied face. Something inside him went very, very still. He closed his eyes and waited for the final shot. Instead, he heard the door explode. Griffin's Last Stand and the Hideout. 小标题, The Rescue. Griffin came through the shattered door like a force of nature, a silver bar in one hand and a revolver in the other. Get up. She's not dead. Sterling's aim is terrible when he's showing off. Flesh wound. Now get up. Robin got up. Griffin cut his bonds, pressed the Wakshinji bar into his hand, and pulled him toward the door. Victoire was with them alive, bleeding, her arm around Griffin's shoulder. They moved down the corridor, past stunned guards, into the night. At the castle's outer wall, Griffin produced a ceramic grenade packed with black powder and silver shavings and hurled it at the gate. The explosion was deafening. They ran through the smoke. At the edge of the castle grounds, a figure stepped into their path. Sterling Jones, coat singed, face bleeding from a dozen small cuts, holding a gun. Griffin, Sterling said, I've been waiting for this. I know. Griffin sounded almost tired. Evie, the ambush. You've been trying to kill me for 5 years. Here's your chance. They fired at the same time. 2 shots, 1 sound. Sterling's bullet took Griffin in the stomach. Griffin's bullet took Sterling in the chest. Both men dropped. Robin ran to his brother. The blood was pumping dark and arterial between Griffin's fingers. I have silver, Robin said, fumbling in his pockets. He found the bark sou to repair and pressed it to the wound. The silver glowed. The blood slowed, but the bullet was too deep. The flesh would not knit. Stop, Griffin said. It's done. No, listen to me. Griffin's hand closed over Robin's wrist, grip surprisingly strong. The network is bigger than me. Victoire knows the contacts. Take the Waxinji bar, and don't stop. Don't ever stop. Griffin, you were the better one. You were always the better one. His hand went slack. Robin knelt in the blood and mud and shattered glass, his brother's body cooling beneath his hands. Sterling lay a few feet away, equally dead. 2 bullets, no victory for anyone. Victoire pulled Robin to her feet. Her arm was still bleeding, but her voice was steady. We have to go. Where? Griffin's hideout under Magpie Alley. They ran. Behind them, the bells of Oxford kept tolling and the prison sirens began to wail. Robin did not look back. If he looked back, he would see Ramy on the floor, Letty's smoking gun, Griffin's open eyes, and he would stop running, and if he stopped running, he would never start again. The hideout. Griffin's hideout was a single room beneath Magpie Alley, arranged to look exactly like his old dormitory, as if he had spent 5 years trying to recreate a home he could never return to. Robin and Victoire cleaned their wounds in silence. Victoire's bullet wound was shallow. Sterling had aimed to wound, not kill. Robin's wrists were raw from bonds, his mind fogged with residue of the friend bar. They did not speak. There were no words. When the bleeding stopped, they searched the room. In Griffin's desk, they found coded letters, a cipher key, and a sealed envelope with Robin's name. He did not open it. He was not ready. They also found a lantern of brass and glass, a silver bar set into its base engraved with Liao and Bassin, Mandarin and Germanic, to burn, to illuminate. Beacon. It's a signal device, Victoire said. You burn a message, and the matched lantern somewhere else shows the same flame. They wrote on a scrap of paper, a call to arms. The war vote is in 2 days. Meet at the old library at dawn. They placed it in the lantern and activated the silver. The paper burned. The flame flared blue, then gold, then vanished. Did it work? Robin asked. I don't know. They slept in shifts. In the morning, they crept out and made their way to the old library. The building was a ruin. The police had come in the night after Letty's betrayal. The door was smashed, windows broken, shelves overturned, desks reduced to splinters, and in the center of the room, arranged in a neat row, were 3 bodies. Anthony Ribbon, Vimal Srinivasan, and Ramy. Someone had covered their faces with cloth, but Robin knew them. He knew the set of Ramy's shoulders, the shape of Anthony's hands. He stood in the doorway and looked at his friends' bodies, and something inside him calcified. We're going to the tower, he said. Victoire looked at him. What? The pamphlets failed, the lobbying failed, the persuasion failed. Griffin was right. The only language the Empire understands is force. He turned to face her. We take the tower, we stop the silver, we shut down Babel until the government cancels the invasion. I want to watch it crumble. I want every bar of silver that powers this empire to go cold. I want them to feel what we felt when Ramy died. Victoire stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, I want it to burn. The tower falls silent. They walked to the tower together, the Waxinji bar in Robin's pocket and the cold fire of grief in their hearts. The streets of Oxford were quiet in the gray dawn. They slipped through the main gate. The wards recognized Robin's blood and climbed the stairs to the great hall. A handful of scholars and graduate students were at work, hunched over desks. Robin jumped onto the nearest table. Listen to me. Every head turned. Professor Lovell is dead. He was planning a war against China, a war for silver, for opium, for the enrichment of a few merchants at the cost of thousands of lives. The evidence is in his desk, in his letters, in the files of this institute. I have seen it. I have held it in my hands. Professor Playfair stepped forward, face twisted with fury. This is absurd. Mr. Swift is a wanted fugitive, you knew, Robin said. You helped him, you and Lovell and De Vries. You have been planning this war for years. You sent us to Canton knowing the mission would fail. You wanted it to fail because failure was the pretext for invasion. You have no evidence. The letters are in Lovell's desk. Right now, anyone can check. A murmur ran through the room. Playfair's face went pale. Professor Chakravarti, the senior Sanskrit chair who had trained half the translators in the hall, rose slowly. Even Playfair stopped speaking. I believe him, Chakravarti said. The room went very still. Chakravarti continued, Too many coincidences, too many convenient justifications. Mr. Swift's claims are disturbing but not implausible. And given what this institute has become, he looked at Playfair. I believe him. One by one, others rose. Professor Kraft, the Latinist, stood. The graduate students from the fourth floor stood. A ripple of allegiance spread through the hall. Robin, standing on the table with morning light streaming through the windows, felt something shift. He was no longer a fugitive. He was no longer a murderer. He was the voice of a truth that had been waiting to be spoken. We are shutting down Babel. No silver will leave this tower. No bars will be engraved. No infrastructure will be maintained. The empire relies on us, our languages, our translations, our work. Without us, the carriages stop, the bridges crumble, the telegraph goes silent. The war machine grinds to a halt. This is treason, Playfair hissed. Yes, Robin said, it is. Victoire stepped up beside him. She struck the ceremonial bell. The note rang through the hall like a summons. You have until dawn, Robin said. Leave the tower. Your blood vials will be destroyed, your access revoked. You are no longer welcome here. Playfair did not move. You don't have the authority. Victoire produced Griffin's revolver and leveled it at Playfair's chest. I have this. The room held its breath. Playfair stared at the gun, at Victoire's steady hand, at the circle of scholars who had turned against him. Then he turned and walked out of the tower. His allies followed, a slow procession of disgraced academics filing into the morning light. When the last was gone, Robin looked at the people who remained, Chakravarti, Professor Kraft, the graduate students, the junior scholars who had chosen truth over loyalty. They were few, but they were enough. This is a strike, Robin said. We hold the tower, we stop the war, and we do not stop until the Empire listens. Outside, the bells of Oxford began to toll. The city was waking. The world was about to learn what happened when the tower fell silent. Robin did not know if they would win. He did not know if they would survive. But for the first time since Ramy fell, since Griffin died, since his father's smile had pushed him over the edge, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. And he knew he would not stop. Not until it was over. Not until the tower burned. Episode 6. Toma violenta de Babel, tu Victoire sobrevive y elige el futuro. The floor of Babel's vestibule had not stopped vibrating since Robin and Victoire finished their announcement, and the crowd of academics that had been a shocked audience was now splitting into dangerous shapes. Up on the dais, where the ceremonial bell still rang faintly in the air, Robin could see the Professor Playfair calculating the distance to the main doors. You'll need to secure the tower, Playfair said, letting a thin, malicious laugh escape. You'd have to subdue all of us. I suppose that is exactly what we are doing, Victoire answered. Her voice was flat, but her hand had already moved inside her coat. Playfair pointed at the nearest student, a slim second year with a boyish face who had frozen near the door. You. Go get the guards. Let them in. The boy did not move. He was Ibrahim, an Egyptian student of Arabic. Robin recognized him from the reading rooms. Ibrahim looked from Playfair to the two older students on the dais, and his jaw tightened. He stayed where he was. Playfair made a noise of disgust and pushed past him. He lifted a hand toward the heavy iron latch. Before his fingers touched it, Victoire drew the revolver that had belonged to Robin's half-brother Griffin, the one Robin had last seen smoking in the Oxfordshire woods, aimed and fired. The report split the air. Playfair spun backward, clutching his chest, and collapsed onto the stone. Blood welled between his fingers, but his eyes stayed open, wide and white. Professor De Vries lunged toward the dais. Professor Leblanc, Victoire's supervisor, took 2 steps forward and raised a silver bar in his fist, mouthing what might have been a word in Old French. But the Professor Chakravarti, who had been standing motionless near the staircase, swung his heavy carved walking stick into the back of De Vries's knees. The man crumpled. LeBlanc hesitated, saw the blood spreading under Playfair, and let his hand drop. "No one else has to bleed," Robin said, raising his voice over the shouts and scraping chairs. "This is a coup d'etat. Babel is shutting down. No silver will be engraved in this tower until the British government withdraws its warships from the South China Sea and agrees to our terms. Sit down and you will not be harmed." The noise took a long moment to settle. Professor Kraft stood near the back, her face bleached of color, but she did not cry out. Several graduate translators pressed toward the door. Ibrahim and a tall Ottoman student, Yusuf, moved to block it, their faces uncertain but their bodies planted. Victoire kept the revolver level and addressed the hall. "You're going to surrender your blood vials." "Everyone, now!" Playfair gasped something from the floor, a curse, or maybe an order, but no one listened. The mercenaries who had been stationed at the tower entrance were dragged inside by a party of third-year students. Their hands had already been bound with academic sashes. Within 20 minutes, every professor and master translator in the building had lined up to empty their pockets of the small glass vials that held the blood that linked them to Babel's wards. Robin collected the vials himself, arranging them in a neat row on the dais. "You cannot do this," the Professor Playfair rasped from the floor. His wound was shallow, a groove across his ribs where the bullet had torn sideways. "The Empire will crush you. The Empire needs us more than it needs you," Victoire said. She did not look at him. "You taught us that yourself." Expelling the order, declaring the strike. The blood vials made a cold music when they touched one another. Robin stood beside the pile while the last of the translators filed past. He offered a choice to everyone present: walk out of the tower now, unmolested, or stay and join the strike. He did not pretend the choice was simple. Anyone who left would be treated as a collaborator. Anyone who stayed would face the Crown's retaliation. The Professors Kraft and Chakravarti exchanged a long glance. Chakravarti took a step toward the door, then stopped. Kraft pressed her lips into a pale line and folded her arms, clearly furious, but she did not leave. Professors De Vries and LeBlanc hurried out without a backward glance, their robes billowing. Playfair demanded to be carried, and when no one moved, Victoire told two of the younger students to haul him to the infirmary. He cursed them all the way, calling them ingrates, children, traitors to the Crown. By late afternoon, the tower was quiet. 6 academics remained inside, including Professor Kraft, the Professor Chakravarti, Ibrahim, a young Tamil woman named Megana, a Persian graduate called Juliana, and the Ottoman student Yusuf. Robin carried the pile of vials from those who had abandoned the tower to a small brazier in the courtyard, and, one by one, cracked them against the iron rim and tipped the blood into the flames. The smoke smelled of copper and salt. It was the smell, he realized, of closing a door forever. Victoire joined him on the balcony of the 8th floor, where the afternoon light lay thin and the city of Oxford stretched beneath them in its familiar gold and gray arrangement. She held a silver bar engraved with the Greek word polemikos polemic, quarrel, the weapon of public dispute, and a stack of pamphlets that she had printed in the basement press over the last sleepless night. "Polemikos," she whispered, pressing the bar to the top sheet. "Polemica, discutere, to debate." The stack slid over the iron railing and caught the wind. The pamphlets fanned outward like a flock of white birds, then shot down toward the streets. They plastered themselves to doorways, clung to gentlemen's coats, wedged into carriage windows. A few were snatched up and read, most were slapped away with irritation. But not all of them. The words Babel esta and Huelga Babel is on strike, and the phrase nada de guerra in China, no war in China, would be seeping through Oxford by dusk. Robin leaned against the railing beside her. "Are you all right?" "I did it for Anthony," Victoire said. The words were hard, as though she had rehearsed them. "That's the last time I'm going to talk about it." She turned and walked back inside, and Robin understood that she had placed her grief somewhere unreachable, and that she would not let him touch it. The first days of the strike: hunger, silence, and a falling tower. The tower was not built for inhabitation. There were no beds, no baths, no kitchen beyond a single grate. The first evening they inventoried the supplies: walnuts, tinned meat, hard biscuit, oatmeal, and several cases of claret that Professor Kraft ordered locked away to keep heads cool. Robin slept 3 hours that first night, curled under his coat on the wooden floor of the reading room. On the second day, a telegram arrived from the Foreign Office. Please reopen the tower so that it remains operational. No threat, no signature. Robin read it aloud in the vestibule, and the small group of strikers listened in the echoing silence. Professor Kraft said, "They're waiting to see if we mean it." Chakravarti added nothing, but his knuckles were white on his walking stick. The third and fourth days brought nothing at all. No soldiers, no messages, no supporters at the gates. Oxford went about its business, lectures, chapel, tea, but the gas lamps along High Street flickered and dimmed, and the great clock on the university church had stopped at 17 minutes past 7. On the fifth day, Victoire woke Robin before dawn. Magdalen Tower has fallen. She led him to the 8th-floor window, where the graceful spire of Magdalen had stood. A brown cloud of dust was rising. The tower's silver bars, which had been installed to stabilize its ancient foundations, had failed when the biannual maintenance was missed because Playfair lay sedated with laudanum in the infirmary. The collapse was an accident, a quiet catastrophe that began with a crack like a pistol shot and ended with stone raining into the quadrangle. No one was hurt, but the noise of it rolled across the city. Robin stared at the dust cloud and felt a dark excitement he could not explain. "The resonance rods," he said. "Upstairs, if we remove them, we can spread this. We can make the whole country feel what happens when Babel stops." Professor Kraft objected immediately. This was sabotage, not negotiation, and Chakravarti warned that they had no mandate to destroy public infrastructure. But Robin saw in Victoire's face a reflection of his own determination. They climbed to the resonance chamber together, the narrow room where hundreds of silver rods quivered in their iron racks, each one linked by sympathetic vibration to a distant bar somewhere in Britain. They agreed to pull 24 rods each day, escalating by 12 more each morning until the crown answered. Robin gripped the first rod and tugged. It came free with almost no resistance. A faint chime rang through the chamber, and somewhere in Oxford a carriage lamp sputtered out. He reached for the second and the third, and by the time they had worked through the first 24 rods, the city beyond the windows had gone dark except for candlelight and the red haze of scattered fires. The mob and the professor's spell. By the 6th afternoon, the crowds outside the tower were no longer curious. They were hungry and afraid. The clock failures had scrambled market hours, the gas shutdown had spoiled meat, and the railway signals had malfunctioned, causing 2 collisions in the night. Someone had scrawled Satan Stongues across the tower's front doors. A mob gathered in the street below, students from Balliol townsmen, several butchers still in their bloody aprons carrying armloads of kindling and a barrel of pitch. They began shouting for the traitors to come out. A bottle shattered against the iron railing inches from Robin's head. Chakravarti pulled him back inside and barred the shutters. He limped to the high window above the entrance and drew a silver bar from his sleeve inscribed in Sanskrit, the paired words for delusion and awakening. He pressed the bar to the stone and whispered the activation. The crowd below faltered. Their shouting grew confused. The men and women stared at one another, at the torches in their hands, as though waking from a dream. Within a quarter hour they had dispersed, dragging their barrel of pitch behind them. After that, the strikers began fortifying the tower. Ibrahim and Yusuf piled books against the windows. Meghana and Juliana filled canvas sacks with sand from the basement. Robin dug through the late Professor Lovell's papers and found an old match pair for the Chinese character Lie Sharp, benefit, profit that could whet a blade. He kept it close, but he also kept the cold bar that had killed Evie Brooke against his skin, and the temptation of it never left him. The workers arrive, and London trembles. The 7th morning brought something none of them had expected: barricades. Robin climbed to the parapet at dawn and saw them overturned carts, sand barrels, fallen lamp posts, and rough-hewn planks all lashed together in a ring around the tower's perimeter. Behind the barricades stood men in cloth caps and leather aprons, women with shawls pulled tight, teenage boys holding pry bars. A short, broad-shouldered man, with a face Robin dimly recognized, was directing the construction. By the time Robin and Victoire descended, the man had climbed the barricade and was waiting at the tower's front door. He introduced himself as Abel Goodfellow, and it was only when Victoire flinched that Robin realized this was the man who had thrown the egg at her months ago, the day the crowds had surged outside the tower after the textile layoffs. Goodfellow met her eyes and said, "That was never personal, miss. We were angry at the wrong people." Now we've learned who the enemy is, and we're here to help you fight him." The Alliance reshaped the strike. Goodfellows workers, freshly radicalized by the pamphlets the Hermes network had spread across London, had walked out of their factories, foundries, and mills 2 days earlier. A general strike was spreading across the capital. The barricades around Babel were not just a defensive ring, they were a signal to the crown that the working poor of England would stand between the traitors in the tower and the soldiers sent to crush them. The army arrived that afternoon, a battalion of infantry in scarlet coats marching up High Street in tidy formation. Their commanding officer, a major with an iron-gray mustache, halted his column 50 yards from the barricade and asked to negotiate. Goodfellow went out alone, arms spread to show he carried no weapon, and returned 20 minutes later with a crooked grin. 48 hours to disperse, he said. Hell give us more warnings after that. Military men hate being seen as the aggressor. Within the tower, the atmosphere grew strange. Food began to flow through gaps in the barricades, bread wrapped in cloth, cheese, even fresh carrots sent by sympathizers across Oxford. A teenage girl slipped into the tower and asked if she could stay to help. She said she had walked from her family's farm in Headington because she had read the pamphlet and believed the strike was righteous. The tower was no longer a fortress of desperate scholars. It was becoming the center of a community. But the pressure also rose. On the 8th day, the carriage system in London failed catastrophically. The silver bars that stabilized the wheels and axles of the omnibuses and private coaches had been failing for a week. When a Royal Mail coach coupling shattered on Whitehall, the horses bolted and the carriage overturned, crushing 3 pedestrians and killing the driver. The Times blamed the strikers for savage indifference to British life. The radical papers, quieter but insistent, ran woodcuts of children mangled by silver-driven factory machinery under the headline, "The Real Cost of the Empire's Silver Hunger." Robin read the accounts with a knot in his stomach and redoubled his demands. He and Victoire clashed openly now. She argued that accelerating the destruction would kill innocent people and turn public opinion against them. He replied that Parliament would never negotiate until the harm was unbearable. They will only move when their own children are in danger, he said. She did not have an answer for that. 5 minutes of honesty and the bridge that could fall. In the midst of the chaos, Professor Kraft asked to speak with Robin alone. She found him in the resonance chamber, where he spent hours now, tracing the connections between each silver rod and the distant infrastructure it sustained. She told him about her first patent, a silver bar engraved to improve minecarts in Tynesshire. The match pair had been clever lever to raise and its Saxon counterpart, but the bar had cracked after 2 years of use, and a child, an 8-year-old boy, had been caught in the mechanism. He lost both legs below the knee. "I never spoke about it," Professor Kraft said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled against her skirt. "I let the company pay off the family. I told myself the boy would have died anyway, that children died in the mines every day. I have been lying to myself for 15 years. Robin did not know what to do with her confession. He offered her a hand, and she took it, and they stood in the quiet of the resonance chamber while the rods hummed around them. It was the Professor Kraft who broke the silence, with a practical, terrible fact. The silver bars that supported the Westminster Bridge had been installed in the same year as her patent, and they had never been replaced. The bridge's silver was due for renewal in 3 days. No one would renew it now. "If the bridge fails," Robin said slowly, "London will see that we are serious." The Professor Kraft stared at him. 63 people died in the last bridge collapse. That was in Scotland, a tiny span. Westminster Bridge is twice the length and packed with traffic at every hour. Parliament meets on the other side of Westminster Bridge. "You are talking about murder." Robin did not answer. He went downstairs and laid the facts before the group. Victoire listened in horror. Ibrahim and Juliana sat very still. The vote was 4-3. Chakravarti, the professor of Sanskrit, rose slowly and placed his silver pencil, his notebook, and 2 blank bars on the table. "There is a just war in the Bhagavad Gita," he said. "This is not it. You are no longer fighting for liberation, Robin. You are fighting because you want the world to burn. I will not be part of it." He took his blood vial from the pile on the dais and walked out of the tower alone. 3 other graduate translators followed him. Robin watched them cross the barricades in the gray morning light, and the number of those who stayed in the tower fell to a handful. A photograph and a suspicion. The waiting afterward was worse than the violence. The strikers had no coffee, no tea, and the cooking fat had gone rancid. Victoire spent her afternoons moving the resonance rods. Robin spent his staring at the ceiling, repeating to himself Ramy's laugh, the way Ramy had once recited ghazals in the Magpie Lane flat, the way he had pushed the jar of sweets across the table in their first week at Oxford. Victoire found him in one of those silences and pressed something into his hand. It was the daguerreotype, the folded tin frame that Letty had insisted on purchasing during their second winter. The four of them posed stiffly in their Babel robes. The plate was bent at the corner, but the image was intact. Letty smiling, Victoire stiff with nervousness, Ramy looking murderously bored, Robin himself half blinking. "She kept this," Victoire said. "Letty. She had it folded inside her coat when she shot him." Robin stared at the four faces. She knew he would never want her. She knew it the night of the ball, and she's been nursing that humiliation for months. "You think she killed him because he refused her?" "I think she killed him because he made her feel small, and she had the power to make him stop." Robin drew a Chinese character on the dusty floor. Xi, a crack, a rift, used in Qing courts to describe enmity between families. "That's what she is to me now, a crack that can't be mended." Victoire said nothing, but her hand settled on Robin's shoulder and stayed there. Later, Ibrahim approached them with a notebook and a pen. He wanted to write a chronicle of the strike interviews, testimonies, a record that could survive even if the tower did not. Robin told him to go ahead, though he privately doubted anyone would read such a document. The Empire had already begun to erase them. The Times had stopped printing their names. They were now the foreign agitators and the seditious element. Ibrahim's chronicle might be the only proof they had existed. That evening, a bullet shattered the window above Victoire's workspace. The casing was silver-lined Playfair's work, a modified round that could pierce the wards that normally protected the tower. The old professor had recovered enough to fight back, and his revenge was precise and patient. London bleeds, and a girl dies in Jericho. On the 9th night, the 3-day window Professor Kraft had warned about ran out. The silver bars gave way at 3 in the morning, when the traffic was light but the watermen were already on the river. The stones rumbled for 20 minutes before the central arch collapsed, dropping carts, horses, and late-night revelers into the Thames. 63 people died, drowned, crushed, swept into the freezing current. The Morning Chronicle called it the murderous fruit of Oxford's treachery, and the Spectator, which had cautiously supported the strike, printed an editorial that asked whether the strikers had finally proven themselves the barbarians the Crown always claimed them to be. The news reached Oxford by midday. Robin read the account, set the paper down, and vomited into a basin. But before the nausea had passed, a boy burst into the tower with news from the barricades. Soldiers had shot a girl in Jericho. A civilian, a young woman with fair hair carrying a market basket. She had been caught between the alley and the barricade when a nervous infantryman fired. She bled out on the cobbles while her basket of eggs rolled into the gutter. Oxford erupted. The night that followed was a chaos of mobs, snipers, and house fires. Abel Goodfellow rushed between the barricades, shouting at his people to hold, but the crowd had become a monster. Men threw themselves at the soldiers with crowbars and hammers, and the soldiers responded with bayonets. By midnight, half the barricades were burning, and the other half had been abandoned. Robin stood on the tower balcony and watched the city that had once seemed like paradise consume itself below him. Goodfellow appeared at the tower door an hour before dawn, soot-streaked and bleeding from a cut above his eye. "The army will storm the tower at sunrise," he said. "Anyone still here will be shot or hanged. I can get you out through the tunnels, but you have to come now." Robin shook his head. "You can't win," Goodfellow said. "You've already lost." "Winning isn't the point anymore," Robin answered. "I want them to remember what we did." Goodfellow stared at him for a long moment. Then he took the stack of papers. Robin handed him the letters, the confessions, the chronicle Ibrahim had been writing, and tucked them inside his coat. "It'll make sure they're read," he said, and left. The white flag and the final treason. An hour before sunrise, a white flag appeared at the edge of the ruined barricade. Letty Price, the friend who had shot Ramy and now served the Crown, walked up the steps of the tower wrapped in a gray cloak, her face thinner and harder than Robin remembered. She was not escorted. The soldiers let her pass, but they did not follow. She entered the tower alone and asked to speak with Robin and Victoire in the cold vestibule under the flickering light of a single oil lamp. Letty told them that Parliament had refused every demand. The vote for war against China had passed, the expeditionary force had already sailed, and the crown would sooner see Oxford razed than capitulate to a handful of foreign-born translators. The army would storm the tower at 6 o'clock. Anyone who surrendered would be imprisoned. Anyone who resisted would be killed. "I can still save you," Letty said. Her voice broke on the word you, and Robin heard in that crack the old Letty, the girl who had sold her bracelets for a stagecoach fare. The girl who had cried in the dining hall after her first day of class. The girl who had once been his friend. "If you walk out now, I can argue for clemency. The court will listen to me." "You killed Ramy," Victoire said. Letty's face twisted. "That was an accident. I was aiming at the papers." "I didn't want to hit anyone." "You knew how to shoot," Robin said. "Your father taught you. You hit exactly what you meant to hit." Letty's composure cracked. She began to protest, but Robin cut her off. He described the night of the dance, how Ramy had refused to dance with her, the humiliation in her eyes. He described the word she, the crack, the enmity, and let it hang in the air between them. Letty's face went white. She did not deny it. She simply turned and walked back through the door, and her white flag dragged on the stone behind her. Robin and Victoire stood in the silence. Outside, the sky was turning the color of ash. 5. What Robin had always plans. "How long have you been planning this?" Victoire asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "From the beginning," Robin said. "From the moment I knew Lovell had used me. I've felt, for years, that I didn't have the right to be alive, that everything I touched was stolen, and the only way to pay it back was to take something irreplaceable from the Empire and destroy it along with myself." Victoire hit him. It was a clumsy blow, almost a slap, but it carried the weight of all the nights she had stayed awake worrying, all the arguments she had lost. "You don't get to choose what I do with my life," she said. "And you don't get to die because you feel guilty. I'm not asking you to die with me." Robin's voice was very quiet. "I'm asking you to carry what we've done out of this tower. Someone has to tell them what happened here. Someone has to keep the fight alive." Victoire's anger collapsed into tears. She pressed her forehead against Robin's shoulder and wept, and he held her. And for a moment the tower was not a fortress or a mausoleum, but the place where four friends had once laughed over lemon biscuits and argued about translation. Who stays and who goes? Robin gathered the remaining strikers in the vestibule and explained the plan. They would stack silver bars in every vulnerable corner of the tower, the foundations, the window frames, the shelf brackets, and activate them simultaneously, using a match pair that Playfair had once demonstrated in class. The chain reaction would render every bar in Babel inert, useless, a permanent fracture in the Empire's silver network. But to ensure the reaction was total, several people would have to remain inside the tower at the moment of activation, reciting the trigger words in multiple languages so the effect could not be localized and countered. Those people would not survive. Professor Kraft stepped forward. Magana and Juliana joined her. Ibrahim took Juliana's hand, and the two of them did not let go. Yusuf said, "I'll go with Victoire. Someone has to protect the Chronicle." Victoire looked at Robin, and he saw the question forming on her lips, the one she had asked him earlier. "Are you not going to ask me to stay?" And he shook his head before she could speak it aloud. "Go," he said. "Write to Ramy's parents. Tell them what he did. Tell everyone what we did. Do not let them forget." They spent the next hour hauling silver from the vaults. Hundreds of bars, some centuries old, etched with languages that no one in the tower could still read. They built pyramids of silver against the foundations, filled the window seats, lined the staircase railings. The metal was cold and heavy, and its chill seeped into their bones. At 5:45, Victoire and Yusuf said their goodbyes. Victoire embraced Robin for a long moment, and when she pulled away, her face was wet, but her eyes were steady. "You made me carry your life," she said. "I hope you know what a cruel gift that is." "I know," he said. "Thank you for carrying it." They slipped out through the basement tunnel toward the river and the waiting horse grove had prepared. Robin climbed to the 8th floor and stood among the humming resonance rods. Professor Kraft recited a passage from Seneca under her breath. Meghana chanted in Tamil. Ibrahim murmured a quiet prayer in Arabic. Robin looked out the window one last time at the spires of Oxford, the smoke rising from the barricades, the scarlet lines of soldiers advancing up High Street. Then he placed his hand on the nearest pile of silver and spoke the word that had haunted him since his first day at Babel. The last translation, N4 translation, turnover, betrayal. The Chinese character split the silence, and the bars began to vibrate. A sound rose from the metal, not a crack or a roar, but a singing, a high, keening note that seemed to carry an entire dictionary of loss inside it. Every word that had ever been mismatched, every meaning that had slipped through the gap between two languages, every beautiful failure that the scholars of Babel had tried to trap in silver, all of it was singing now. Robin walked among the vibrating piles, repeating the word again and again, and the singing deepened. The floor began to tremble, cracks raced up the stone walls, the resonance rods shivered in their racks and then, one by one, shattered. He thought about Ramy, not about the death, but about the morning they had met, the way Ramy had pushed a tin of sweets across the table and grinned. He thought about the first line Ramy had ever taught him in Urdu, and the way he had said translation was the act of truly listening. When I speak, you listen. The ceiling split open, and daylight poured in. For one extraordinary moment, Robin saw the tongues of silver flame leaping from every bar, and they were not hot or punishing. They were almost gentle. He thought of his mother's face, the way she had looked at him that last morning in Canton, before the fever took her clarity away. He thought of the word treacle, the first silver he had ever felt, and the sweetness it had laid on his tongue. The world became weightless. When the ceiling fell, Robin's eyes were closed, and the last thing he saw was his mother's smile. Epilogue. Victoire did not look back at the tower. She had heard the singing, felt the earth shudder beneath her horse's hooves, but she did not turn her head. Yusuf rode beside her, pale and silent. They crossed the Cherwell at a shallow ford and climbed into the Cotswolds as the sun rose fully over the wreckage of Oxford. The letters she carried were sewn into the lining of her dress. A letter from Griffin, Robin's half-brother, the head of Hermes with its three names, Martlet, Oriel, Presson, Rook, and the line, "We are not the only ones," and Robin's final note to Ramy's parents, which she had promised to deliver. Silver was stitched into her seams as well, enough that the fabric felt stiff and heavy, enough to reshape a small corner of the world. She had been born in Haiti, in the shadow of a revolution the world preferred to forget. French officers had taken her as a child and called it guardianship. She had been sold, bought, and presented as a curiosity in the household of a man who believed he was giving her a life she should be grateful for. She had learned that gratitude was a cage long before Robin taught her to name it. Now she rode north through the English winter with a dead man's words against her skin and the names of three strangers in her memory. Somewhere ahead of her, there were other Hermes cells, other traders, other people who had decided that the Empire's debt was overdue. She did not know them yet, but she would find them. The tower fell at 6:27 in the morning, and by the time the dust settled, there was nothing left of Babel but a crater of warm rubble and the lingering scent of hot silver. The chronicle that Ibrahim had written and that Goodfellow had carried would survive in a dozen hand-copied editions, passed from hand to hand among the radicals of London and Manchester. It told the story of 5 young translators who had brought the world's greatest empire to its knees for 10 days. It told the truth, and the truth, like a silver bar pulled from its rack, kept humming long after the source of the sound had gone silent. The last image of the serial is not Babel falling. It is Victoire riding away from the rubble, alone on horseback, silver sewn into the seams of her dress, carrying a letter she has not yet opened. She knows 3 names, Martlet, Oriel, Rook. She knows the phrase, "We are not the only ones." She does not know what waits for her on the other side of that sentence. The novel ends not in victory, but in survival, which is a much more difficult thing to write and a much harder thing to live. The person who wrote that ending knows something about survival inside elite institutions. F.Kuang was trained at Oxford's University College, the same college Robin Swift walks into in the novel's early chapters. She holds a master's from Cambridge and is now completing a doctorate at Yale in East Asian languages and literatures. She has described Babel as both a love letter to Oxford's libraries and a breakup letter to the institution itself. That duality is not a marketing line. It is visible on every page, and it is loudest in the final stretch, when Robin chooses to destroy the tower rather than hand it back to the people who built it. Kuang has said in interviews that she wrote the book partly to answer a question she kept confronting during her own studies. What is all this knowledge actually for? The magic system she invented, silver that captures what is lost in translation, is not neutral world building. It is an argument. It says that the gap between languages produces real power, and that someone profits from that gap, and that the people who do the translating are rarely the people who get to decide where the silver goes. Unquote. This is not a distant historical concern. It is a description of how elite universities have historically extracted expertise from their students from colonized nations while calling the operation scholarship. The novel takes that logic to its extreme and then asks the question Kuang could not resolve inside the real Oxford. What would it look like to stop cooperating? The answer the story gives is destruction. Not reform, not dialogue, not a better administrative policy. Destruction. The tower falls because Robin decides that no version of Babel can be redeemed, and Kuang, who knew the real cloisters and courtyards firsthand, chose to burn them down on the page. What makes this more than author trivia is that the book does not let its own thesis stand unchallenged. The destruction of Babel kills almost everyone Robin loves. It kills Robin himself. The novel never pretends that smashing the machine is clean or satisfying. It only insists that sometimes, for some people, there genuinely is no other door. The survivor is the one who agreed to stay alive long enough to find out what the letter says. So the coda does not land on Kuang wrote a powerful anti-colonial fantasy. It lands on something narrower and more uncomfortable. Some institutions are so thoroughly built on extraction that loving them is not enough to stay, and the people who walk away may have to carry what they learned into a new country, a new language, a new name. Victoire's horse is still moving when the novel ends. Kuang's career is still unfolding. The question the book leaves open is the one it cannot answer, whether the next tower will be any different.